Story 1. The Stranger on Old Quarry Road. Ben was clocking out of his late shift, exhausted after an especially busy night. He worked at a small, family-owned restaurant about an hour from his house, so his drive home cut through miles of dark, empty back roads. It wasn't his favorite route, but at that hour, it was the fastest way home. It was around 1:30 a.m. when he finally hit the road, and as he drove, the glow of the city lights faded behind him. Trees on either side grew denser, and soon, all he could see was what his headlights illuminated, a winding stretch of two-lane highway surrounded by woods. As Ben reached a long, quiet bend on Old Quarry Road, he spotted something strange up ahead. His headlights lit up a figure standing near the side of the road. He slowed down a bit, squinting through the darkness. It was a man, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans, standing completely still by the guardrail. As Ben got closer, he realized the man wasn't just standing there. He was staring straight at him. The man's face was pale, his eyes locked onto Ben's car as it approached. For a second, Ben thought of stopping to ask if he needed help, but the unsettling look in the man's eyes sent a shiver down his spine. He decided to keep going, easing his foot off the brake and accelerating past. As he drove by, he stole a glance in his rearview mirror. The man hadn't moved. He was still standing there, his head tilted slightly, watching Ben's car disappear down the road. Ben tried to shake off the eerie feeling, chalking it up to fatigue or just a strange guy on the road. But a few minutes later, as he rounded another curve, his heart stopped. The same man was standing by the side of the road, somehow ahead of him this time. It was impossible. He hadn't seen another car, and there was no way the guy could have run through the dense woods to get ahead of him. This time, Ben's instinct screamed at him to just keep driving. He tightened his grip on the wheel and accelerated, eyes fixed on the road ahead. But as he sped up, he noticed something in his rearview mirror, a flicker of movement. The man was running after him. It shouldn't have been possible. Ben was doing well over 40 miles per hour. Yet there he was, sprinting down the middle of the road, his dark silhouette keeping pace, even as the car pulled further away. Ben felt a cold sweat prickling his skin as he hit 60 miles per hour, refusing to look back. Just keep going, he told himself. Don't look back. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was really only a few minutes, he rounded another bend and lost sight of the man. He felt a wave of relief wash over him as he put more distance between himself and whatever that thing was. But as he drove, his headlights picked up another figure. It was the same man. This time, the stranger was standing in the middle of the road, hands raised as if he were waving Ben down. There was no avoiding him. Ben's heart pounded in his chest as he gripped the wheel and veered hard to the right, nearly driving off the road to avoid him. As he passed, the man's face turned toward him, his mouth stretched in a sick grin, his eyes wide and unblinking. Ben sped down the road, but his headlights flickered and the engine sputtered. The car started to slow, despite him pushing the gas pedal to the floor. He cursed under his breath, desperately willing the car to keep going, but it came to a dead stop in the middle of the road. He glanced around, the forest eerily silent. He was alone, or so he thought. A sharp knock on his window shattered the silence. Ben whipped his head around and saw the man standing inches from his car, his face twisted with rage. Ben's hands shook as he locked the doors, his heart racing as he fumbled for his phone. He could see the man's face up close now, pale, gaunt, and covered in dirt. His eyes were wild, filled with something Ben could only describe as pure malice. The man pounded on the window harder, his fists leaving bloody smears on the glass. "Let me in," he snarled, his voice muffled but filled with fury. "You can't leave me here. Let me in." Ben's mind raced, his heart hammering as he tried to think of a way out. The man was relentless, slamming his fists against the window over and over. Ben knew it was only a matter of time before the glass gave in. In a panic, he pressed the horn, hoping the noise might scare the man off or draw someone's attention. But it only seemed to make him angrier. The man let out a blood-curdling scream and grabbed the car door handle, yanking on it with a strength that seemed inhuman. Ben's hands shook as he gripped the wheel, ready to floor at the second the engine restarted. Finally, with a sputter, the car roared back to life. Without a second thought, Ben slammed his foot on the gas, feeling the tires spin for a second before they gripped the road and the car lurched forward. The man held onto the handle for a few more moments, running alongside the car, before he finally let go and disappeared into the darkness behind him. Ben didn't stop driving until he was safely back in town, his heart still pounding long after he'd parked in his driveway. He locked every door, every window, and sat in his living room, adrenaline coursing through him as he tried to make sense of what had happened. The next morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd narrowly escaped something truly evil. Later that week, he heard that police had found signs of a struggle on Old Quarry Road. A few broken branches, disturbed gravel, and, chillingly, a trail of bloody footprints that led into the woods but never came back out. No body was ever found. Story 2. The Reflection. Samantha had just moved into a quaint little apartment in a historic building that had seen better days. The brick facade was charming, and the creaking wooden floors gave the place character. She loved how the afternoon sunlight poured into her living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Everything felt perfect, until the nights began to change. At first, it was just the odd noises, distant whispers that would echo through the hallways, and the occasional creaking that felt like footsteps. Samantha brushed it off as the quirks of an old building. But then strange things started happening in her apartment. One night, she was settling in after work, ready to binge-watch her favorite series, when she caught a glimpse of movement in the hallway mirror. It was quick, just a shadow flitting past, but it was enough to send chills down her spine. She convinced herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the light. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbances escalated. Samantha would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of faint laughter echoing from the other room. When she got up to investigate, she'd find her living room empty and silent. At first, she thought it was her mind playing tricks, but the feeling of being watched lingered. One particularly late night, she decided to take a long shower to wash away her unease. Steam filled the bathroom, creating a foggy oasis. As she lathered her hair, she caught sight of her reflection in the bathroom mirror. But it wasn't just her. Standing behind her, just at the edge of the glass, was a figure blurred and shrouded in mist. Samantha's heart raced. She whipped around, but no one was there. Shaking, she turned back to the mirror, but the figure was gone. She finished her shower in a frenzy, nerves frayed, and dashed into her bedroom, locking the door behind her. The next few days, Samantha started to feel even more paranoid. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was there with her. One evening, while she was on a video call with her friend, she noticed something unusual. Behind her, in the reflection of her laptop screen, she saw a flash of movement, like a figure darting across the hallway. "Did you see that?" she gasped, her voice shaky. "See what?" her friend replied, looking confused. Samantha turned around, but again there was nothing. She tried to dismiss it, but the unease was growing into something palpable, something suffocating. That night, she decided to confront the fear. Armed with her phone flashlight, she moved through the apartment, illuminating corners and checking closets. Everything seemed normal until she reached the bathroom. She paused, staring at the mirror, recalling the chilling image she had seen. With trembling hands, she raised her phone to capture the reflection. "If you're here, show yourself," she demanded, her voice shaky but defiant. Silence enveloped her. The mirror showed only her anxious face, but just as she turned to leave, the reflection flickered. There it was again, a dark figure, this time more pronounced, standing directly behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Panic surged through her as she stumbled back. The reflection grinned now, its mouth twisting into a wide, grotesque smile. It was as if it knew something she didn't, a cruel awareness that sent chills down her spine. Samantha dashed out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind her, her heart racing. The following night, Samantha couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with the events of the past few weeks. Just as she started to drift off, a loud bang echoed through her apartment, jolting her awake. It came from the bathroom. Fear coursed through her veins as she realized she wasn't alone. She tiptoed to the bathroom door, holding her breath. The door creaked open just a crack, and her heart raced at the sight before her. The mirror reflected not only her terrified face, but also the dark figure behind her, its form more defined now. Looming closer, its eyes locked onto hers. It was no longer just a shadow. It was real, and it was angry. Samantha couldn't hold back a scream as she stumbled backward, knocking over a chair in her panic. The figure in the mirror mimicked her movement, an echo of her terror. But it was getting closer, its hand reaching out toward the glass as if trying to escape. She turned to run, but the apartment door slammed shut, trapping her inside. With frantic energy, she rushed back to the bathroom, hoping to escape through the window. But the figure was there, waiting, its grin wider, eyes burning with malevolent delight. As she glanced in the mirror, her reflection twisted into something grotesque, a mirror image of the dark figure, herself, but not quite. She felt the air grow colder, the laughter echoing around her, and she knew she was losing herself to whatever this thing was. In a final desperate act, she grabbed the edge of the mirror and threw it to the floor. The glass shattered, the noise ringing in her ears. As the shards scattered, she felt an overwhelming rush of wind, and the laughter turned into a screeching howl. The figure disappeared, and for a brief moment, the room fell silent. Breathing heavily, Samantha realized she was alone again. She stepped over the glass, heart pounding, and bolted out of the bathroom. She fled her apartment, not stopping until she was outside, the cool night air a stark contrast to the dread that had filled her home. It wasn't until she reached the safety of the streetlights that she looked back at her apartment. The darkness loomed over it, but as she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something in the window, a distorted reflection, grinning back at her from the broken glass. She never returned to that apartment again, but sometimes on the darkest nights, when she lay in bed trying to sleep, she could still hear the echoes of that laughter, and the feeling that something was watching her from the other side of the glass. I used to think I was good at spotting danger, aware of my surroundings, cautious, always had a solid sense of who I could trust. That night taught me that I was dead wrong. It started like any other evening. I was driving back from a weekend visit to my sister's, a good 3-hour trip through winding back roads and endless stretches of nothing. It was late, around midnight, and the radio was barely picking up anything but static. I remember that eerie quiet in the car, the soft rumble of the engine, the only sound keeping me company. I was about an hour from home when I saw her. She was standing at the side of the road, just under the beam of a single streetlight. She wore a pale yellow dress, her hair falling over her shoulders, and she was staring at the ground, looking lost. I slowed down without even thinking. It was late, cold, and something about her felt familiar. Vulnerable. I rolled down my window as I pulled up beside her. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, like I didn't already feel a chill down my spine. She looked up, her eyes wide and a little startled. She took a step toward the car, and that's when I noticed the tear streaks on her cheeks. I just need a ride," she whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear. Her voice was soft, almost childlike, and she looked over her shoulder nervously, as if she were hiding from someone. I hesitated, but she looked so desperate. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and gestured for her to get in. She slid into the passenger seat, hugging her knees and avoiding my gaze. We drove in silence for a while. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her hands trembling as they clutched her dress. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, why she was out there alone, but something about her expression kept me quiet. There was a hollow look in her eyes, a sadness so deep that I could feel it weighing down the air between us. After a while, she finally spoke. "Can you take me to Meadow Lane?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The name struck me as odd. I'd lived in the area my whole life and never heard of a meadow lane. But before I could say anything, she added, "It's just a little further up." I kept driving, glancing at her occasionally. She sat perfectly still, her eyes focused on the road ahead, her hands clenching her dress so tightly that her knuckles were white. Something wasn't right. I tried to shake off the feeling, but the silence felt heavier with each passing mile. Then, just as I opened my mouth to ask her where exactly she was going, she turned to me, her eyes wide and fearful. "He's coming," she whispered. My blood ran cold. "Who's coming?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to the rearview mirror. I glanced up, and my heart stopped. There, in the distance, I saw headlights. A car was approaching fast, the beams slicing through the darkness like a knife. I forced myself to keep calm, reminding myself that it was probably just another driver. But the girl's face had gone pale, her body tense, and she was muttering something under her breath. I couldn't make out the words, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. As the car drew closer, I realized it was tailing us, keeping pace, and inching closer with each second. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the road, but the headlights grew brighter, almost blinding. I pressed down on the gas, hoping to put some distance between us, but the car matched my speed, staying right on my bumper. "Is that someone you know?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head, her eyes wide and terrified. "Please don't stop. Just keep driving." He won't stop." Her words sent a shiver through me. I floored the gas, speeding down the road. But no matter how fast I went, the car behind us kept pace, its headlights bearing down on us like two burning eyes. Suddenly, the girl grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Turn here," she shouted, pointing to a narrow dirt road that barely looked wide enough for my car. I swerved onto the road, tires skidding in the gravel. The headlights disappeared as we drove into the darkness, surrounded by trees and thick underbrush. My heart was pounding, my hands slick with sweat as I gripped the wheel. For a few minutes, there was nothing but the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Then, just as I began to hope we'd lost him, I saw the headlights again, cutting through the trees as the car tore down the dirt path, kicking up dust and gravel. The girl was practically shaking in her seat, muttering something about, "He always finds me." "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice barely concealing my fear. She just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. He took me once. I thought I got away." Her words made no sense, but the terror in her eyes was real, almost infectious. I pressed down on the gas, the car jolting over rocks and potholes, trying to outrun this phantom driver. The road was winding, the trees casting shadows across the path, making it nearly impossible to see. Just as I felt like we couldn't go any faster, the girl turned to me, her face etched with an expression I'll never forget. "Thank you for trying," she whispered. Before I could ask what she meant, the car behind us closed the gap, slamming into the back of my car. The impact sent us both forward, and I struggled to regain control as the car veered wildly. The girl didn't scream. She just sat there, still as stone, her eyes fixed ahead. The car hit us again, harder this time, sending us skidding off the road and into a ditch. My head hit the steering wheel, and everything went black for a second. When I came to, my vision blurred, and I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. I looked over at the girl, but she was gone. The passenger seat was empty. A cold dread filled my chest as I struggled to make sense of what had happened. My door creaked open, and I felt a hand on my shoulder, strong and rough, pulling me out of the car. I looked up, my vision clearing just enough to see a man standing over me. His face was shadowed, but his eyes, there was nothing in them. No emotion, no humanity, just a hollow, empty stare. He leaned down, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "She can't leave. Not until I let her." With that, he let go of me, disappearing back into the darkness as quickly as he'd appeared. I stumbled back to my car, my heart pounding as I searched for the girl, calling her name into the empty night. But there was no sign of her. No footprints, no sign that she'd ever been there. When the police arrived, they found me alone, dazed and shaken. I tried to explain what happened, but it sounded insane. The officers exchanged glances, the kind that said they'd heard it all before. But as they helped me out of the ditch, one of them stopped, his face pale as he looked at my car. He pointed to the passenger seat, where, faintly scratched into the leather, were the words, "Thank you for trying." If you enjoyed these stories, please like and subscribe. Also, check out my other videos.